as a photographer, and I'm sure a lot of other photographers that put ourselves in this position is we like to be behind the camera.
Mm.
And we like to be online, but like let's not forget old-fashioned networking. And I say this and I'm saying it to myself because I don't enjoy that aspect of it either, but it's important. And once you do it, it feels a lot better once you start making those connections with other people. You're like, oh, this is great. This actually does feel good. And then hopefully you can kind of circle back around, and hopefully our careers are long enough where will continue to meet people. And then someone you might have introduced yourself to, a couple years ago will come back around and find you.
This is your host, Dyutama, but you can call me DJ. And I love to inspire food photographers to dream. I spent 15 years as an architect studying buildings and constructing hospitals before taking the biggest leap of faith of my life, which was setting up a food styling and food photography business right from scratch. If you're a dreamer like me, wanting to start a new photography business or grow your existing food photography business, jump right into a world where I share practical, actionable strategies to improve your photography skills, to work with clients, make more money, all with a fearless mindset. This is the My Food Lens podcast, and we take you one step closer to your dreams. So let's go. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the My Food Lens podcast. And today we continue our conversation with the amazing Tessa Huff at Style Sweet Daily. So today we'll be getting a little bit into the business side of her blogging and photography career. We're going to talk about how she shaped it in spite of having deep, heavy family commitments. We're going to talk about how she worked with hotshot brands, what it took to be able to reach out and to have these, ongoing projects. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what it takes to do your own cookbook shoot. What does a profitable food blogging and photography business look like, especially when you have big family commitments? So Tessa is going to tell us all about it. So let's get started. I have to say, I have to ask you this actually. So a lot of folks, and before I ask you, I just have to tell you that I'm really passionate about this whole pitching, reaching out. It's something that I feel really strongly about. So you have, created an identity for yourself in the industry. You have a pretty good social media following. You have a blog that's been running for so many years now. Do you still pitch and reach out to the brands that you want to work with? Do you still do it?
I do. I do when it's fitting. Yes.
Mm.
I'm not, I would never say like, oh, I don't need to pitch anymore. I've been doing this for so long. That is definitely not the case. If there is a situation or a project that I really would want to work on, I would definitely reintroduce myself. And that's what I'm saying. Like I've been doing this for a while, but it doesn't hurt to reintroduce ourselves, or, I've kind of reinvented myself even. So then in different seasons, it's nice to reintroduce yourself, to let them know what you're working on, what you might be open to working with them and in what way. So if
Mm-hmm.
you reach out one time and you never hear back from somebody, that shouldn't keep you from trying to reintroduce yourself, or being able to, you don't want to send email after email. You don't want to feel like you're bothering someone or you're being annoying,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they just need you to remind them who you are and reach out during the right time. And you can send quarterly reminders of what you do and be like, hey, remember, I would still be interested in this. And the holidays are coming up. Make sure, to book in early and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that, because I
Yeah.
think that reminds them and gives them like, oh, right, this person that I've, met through email or social media a couple times, they're interested in working, and maybe they didn't have an opportunity for you before, but you're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, right, this event is coming up. Maybe that is the right person for that. And kind of
Yeah.
keep
Mm-hmm.
yourself on their radar.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit, like Food Network reached out to you. How about Southern Living? Did they reach out to you or did you reach out to them?
Oh, they had reached out to me to help design, a couple cakes, yeah.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, you were getting discovered left, right, and center. That's amazing.
Well, not always. I will say this: when I started, or when I went to write my cookbook, I had this is
Mhm.
2014 or so, and this was around the time where bloggers were now being approached by agents and editors, and they were starting to become cookbook authors.
Mhm.
I never got asked, but I had friends that got asked. But I said, you know, I'm not going to sit around and wait to see if I might get an agent or an editor to notice me.
Yeah.
I pitched, I went out looking for agents myself. You know,
Mhm.
it's nice when you get recognized and you that email lands in your inbox and like, oh, so and so wants to work with me. That's a wonderful feeling. But I think it has to go, you have to put in some of the effort yourself as well.
Mhm. I
So
love
like
it.
I
Mhm.
went and searched for cookbook agents that were accepting new clients and I started, emailing them and being like, hey, I'm Tessa. I have all this experience in cakes, yada yada. Like, and then lo and behold, there was an agent. My agent's like, "Yeah, let's work together. Let's work on this." So there
Amazing.
is,
Yeah. Yeah. If you
a,
want something,
a
you got to
nice
make it
balance.
happen
Yeah.
for yourself. I mean, right? I love that approach. I just want to recap some of the tips. I think, Tessa, in our conversation right now, we've left some solid tips for, those who really dream of working with big shot clients or hot shot names. And I think one thing that you said was that don't hesitate to reach out and don't stop yourself from reintroducing yourself. So that I think those are really important. And the third thing that you said was that when you do reach out, tell them what you bring to the table. I think for me, like those are the most important things. Don't just throw it out there that, you are another photographer and you want to work with them, but how would you work with them? What will you bring to their brand? I think that's so, so important. So I love these tips. So since we talked
Hmm.
about your cookbook shoot, your cookbook rather, it sounds like something you were so passionate about that you pursued it. You're like, let me get an agent, let me make this happen. So let's just talk a little bit about that. So you got yourself an agent, but how did you even decide that a cookbook is what you need to have? How did that turn out as a dream or become a dream or a goal for you?
Well, like I said, this was a while ago when I was kind of transitioning to the idea of how can I create this career for myself where I really love baking. I don't really want to have a shop or a storefront or work having those types of clients while still starting my family and working from home. And like I said, this was right around the time where bloggers were starting to get book deals. And I was like, oh, this is a real thing. This is how, you don't just have to have a cooking TV show or be a chef at a five-star restaurant to get a cookbook deal. Like, I think this is something I would like to do. And for me, I love the longevity of the project. It is a lot longer than, to plan everything from the, moment you sign your contract to when it's actually like sold in a bookstore. It's years. And
Hmm.
for me, I really like having a long-term project like that. And I love the idea of the recipes in print sitting on a shelf instead of something that you might scroll through instantly on Instagram. So that
Hmm.
was something that I really
Hmm.
was passionate about. And it was starting to become realities for other people like me, where I was like, okay, I think this is something I can do really well.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that dream started.
And at that time, where was your food photography? Were you already like, pretty conversant with it, or were you still learning a little bit? Where was your food photography when you decided to go with this cookbook project?
I was comfortable enough to say, I want to write this cookbook and I want to photograph it myself. And have my publisher say, okay. And
Mm.
they never really said this outright, but I do wonder if it even helped me with getting that first cookbook deal because they wouldn't be hiring a separate photographer and they
Mm.
had already seen some of the photographs of cakes that I had already done. So I was comfortable enough to say I only want to do this as a
Yeah.
photographer, even though looking back, looking back at this book that's forever in print that I can't change, of course, I look at the photos and go like, "Oh, I wish I would have done that differently. Oh, I wish I could make this better." Um, but I mean, I guess that's all of us. Like, if we weren't doing that, then that means we're not
Yeah.
improving our skills. So I guess it's kind of a good thing that I can look at my old work and be like, "Oh, I'm so glad I've come a lot further than that first book." But
But
yeah, I'm
that's
still really
that's
proud
a
of the work
real
I did back then.
advantage. That's a real advantage because I know a lot of bloggers who write cookbooks and they don't feel like competent enough to be able to shoot their own cookbook. They actually hire photographers and they have someone else. More bloggers do that than photographing their own cookbook. So I feel like, anyway, a cookbook is a piece of your heart. It's something that you feel so,
Yeah, I mean,
so,
it's a lot of work too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then to have your own photographs in it, it's really so cohesively a piece of you. So I do see that as a real advantage of shooting your own
Mhm.
cookbooks if you feel confident enough. And there'll always be a time where you're not happy with your photos, right? Who is? We always look
Yeah,
back and
of
we're
course,
like, oh
of course.
man.
And that's the thing is, like, I really enjoy photography just as much as making the desserts. So I think a lot of cookbook photographers, they could take it or leave it. They're like, "Oh, can someone do this part for me?" They would let them. But for me, I would maybe that's a me problem. I want to do it all, which also means a lot of work for me. But like, I can't imagine writing a cookbook now and not photographing the photos myself. Like, I
Wow.
don't that's not something I could hand off to somebody else. Like, that is too close to my heart that I wouldn't be able to step back and not let somebody else do that.
And how did the idea of the second cookbook come about? How did that happen?
Yeah, so my first cookbook, Layered, it sold pretty well. I had a great relationship with my team and my editor, and at some point, there's always a conversation of, "Hey, maybe we could do another one. What do you guys think?" And some cookbook authors do a cookbook, and they're like, "Nope, I did not enjoy that process. It took too long." And it's not the biggest moneymaker, but for me, I loved it. So like the first chance I could tell my editors, like, yes, I would definitely be interested in doing this again, which was good news for her. And she's like, okay, let's start thinking of ideas. And so my second cookbook is called Icing on the Cake. It has a
Mhm.
lot of cakes inside too, but it's not exclusive to layer cakes. There's other decorative desserts in that one as well.
Wow, there's no stopping you, is there? I love it. I love it. And then, I've been just marveling at how much you have on hand in terms of your personal commitments. And yet you have taken on real challenges. Like, not everybody can say, I'm just going to, create this cookbook. I'm going to do the photography. I'm going to go and find an agent and I'm just going to keep pushing through. It's not easy. It's really a lot of people hold back. They take their personal commitments as their limitations. But since we started speaking up until now, this is the exact opposite that I heard you doing. So, I'm just so amazed at everything that you've done in spite of having such big commitments on hand. So tell me a little bit about this cookbook. Let's just talk about your second cookbook. You had the same agent. Did you have a publisher? How much time did it take? What was the amount of labor and hard work that you had to put into it?
So the first cookbook, I told my agent that I was pregnant with my son the same time she told me, guess what? We got a cookbook deal. I'm like, oh no, I had just found out I was pregnant. So what had happened was the deadline was for my recipes to be submitted was like the same time as my son was due to be born. That's what it was. And I was like, "Oh," she's like, "Well, do you want me to see if we can extend this deadline?" I'm like, "Well, that's not going to do me any good. I'm going to have a newborn." So I'm like, "Let's just keep this deadline. It's a hard deadline for both things to happen. If I can't finish by then, like a couple extra months isn't going to do any good." So I actually only had about 6 or 8 months to do the first cookbook. And I think there's 60 cake recipes. And again, I'm talking layers of cake and filling and decoration and garnishes because I tend to go overboard with my recipes in general. So it's not like, 60 smoothies that you might be able to, photograph 5 in a day. It wasn't like that. So that's why I had to have kind of a very strict schedule. For the second cookbook, I had the same editor and publisher, which is Abrams Books, and they put out some really beautiful books, and so I was really happy to work with them. And I had definitely had more time the second time around, and it's partially because they are looking at release dates, and then they're counting backwards of like, okay, how long is this going to take to print? How long is it going to take to edit? And then if we want to put it out at a certain time of year, so we're going backwards. So it's like, okay, if we want to put it out in the spring, well, are we talking spring like 2 years from now? Or are we talking like spring is in 8 months from now? And then that kind of works backwards to figure out how much time I had. So I had maybe a year to submit those recipes. I'm not even sure at this point, yeah. But a
Hmm.
little bit longer. It was a little bit more
Hmm.
flexible.
Oh, wow. And while you were shooting your cookbook, were you also taking on other client projects?
Not as much back then, but I did still want to stay. It's hard. It's hard for us, and I'm sure a lot of people can feel this when you are taking on a personal project or you have something personal in your life, like raising a family or having a baby. Like I find myself like, well, I don't want to run away from, or not run away, but like be offline too long because I don't want to be skipped over. Or I don't want to lose this client because I'm off working on another project and then have them forget about me. And maybe that's more in my head than a reality, but I'm sure we all kind of feel that way. Even like with Instagram, you
Hmm.
take a month off and then you feel like you're being punished once you try to get back on. So it's a hard balance to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
And another, kind of going back to what we said before, like sometimes it's okay. Like I stepped away from working with Food Network for a while and then I had to reintroduce myself and thankfully it worked, but like it hasn't always worked that way. But it's okay because we are changing and our own business models are changing along the way and
Yeah.
hopefully it all works out. I don't know.
And it's not just photography. I feel like I've spoken to a lot of moms in the corporate world, banker friends of mine. They have had babies, they've gone back to work, and they've just felt like, oh, maybe I just need to spend a little bit more time with their child, and they've taken a career break and they have never gone back. So I feel like if you just have a little bit of that momentum going, just a little bit, you never fall off the wagon. You will never
Mhm.
completely drop it. So I like your approach, which is like, kind of keep it there, but you're not completely offline. But at the same time, you know that you can just jump back on when you feel ready. So I love that.
I was gonna say it's really hard when you are self-employed like this because these decisions are really ours. We're not taking like a maternity leave where like in Canada it's wonderful. You can get a year maternity leave and then you can return back to work. Like I don't feel like when you're self-employed and in this type of work that it always works out that way. So it's kind of up on it's hard because I want to take that time off and I want to spend time with my children. And I definitely do as I'm raising them 24/7. But yeah, it's kind of up to you how much. And hopefully you can plan a break and, to
Hmm.
account for any time that you need. But yeah,
And I feel
it's
like,
hard.
just like you said, it's harder when it's up to you. It's tougher when you're in charge. It's tougher when you are accountable only to yourself. It's 10 times harder, and so to be able to stay on track, that's, really amazing to hear. So, Tessa, I just want to ask you, you've made like big shifts in your life, uprooting yourself from a place that itself is a big, big thing. So, moving from California, then having 3 kids, all of this takes not only a toll on our physical health, it also takes a huge toll on our emotions. You've been pushing through, you've been building it passionately and profitably. So I want to just deep delve into the profitable part of it. And I want to ask you, has the business shaped like you wanted it to? Has it been as profitable for you? Have you diversified as much as you wanted it to be? Like, how has the business part of food blogging and photography shaped for you?
Well, I would say it's constantly changing. And it's hard to say, has it panned out the way I thought it would? I honestly didn't know what it was going to look like when I started. I had no idea what power social media would have over some of our work because when I started, like people were barely using Instagram. So there's been some really high highs with that type of work, but it's also changed a lot. So it was a great surprise when I started getting these like brand partnerships and sponsored things to, use this sugar in a recipe, put it on Instagram, and that was very profitable. It's not consistent. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of makes me very anxious because if it's not coming in consistently, I don't know if I should plan for it, if I should look to do something else. And like you can kind of see like my mind doesn't sit still. And I never got into this work, thinking I'd be some sort of like influencer because that wasn't a thing back then. And honestly, that's not really something I enjoy. So it's changed a lot. And while I was working on all these things, like my books and some other brand work, I really let my website slide. And there's some really wonderful blogs and websites out there that are just dominating in their field and they've nailed in their SEO and they rank really high on Google. And my blog has been around for 10 years. But honestly, I didn't put very much attention on it for a long time while I was doing those other things. So while I was balancing kids and books and things, that was actually one thing that I really let slide was my own saying on myself a little bit more. And I've been focusing, I redid my whole website to make it a little bit more SEO friendly and really just now seeing the rewards from that effort that I've put in the last 2 years. I've been working on my newsletter, which I absolutely love because it doesn't have ads, it doesn't have algorithms, it doesn't have anything to do with Google ranking, but it's just really what I'm passionate about and sharing with another community of passionate bakers. And I hope that kind of resonates through my writing and through the recipes that I'm sharing. I'm a little bit more personal over there, talking about like where these recipes come from. Maybe they're part of my family and just another way to connect. So yeah, like I'm not exactly sure it's exactly what I thought it would be because I didn't know what I was going to do, 10 years ago. But I'm in a really good spot right now. And like I said, I've kind of bet more on myself these last couple of years more than I had before. And it's been really enjoyable. So,
For me, there are so many takeaways in what you said. The number one takeaway is that everybody's journey is different. There could be people who are nailing their website and, thriving on social media, but that doesn't mean that you're not doing well. Just because they're doing well doesn't mean you're not doing well. So you kind of, took that in your stride and you're like, okay, so what do I need to do? What's my next step? You're not reacting. You're doing what works for you. That is the number one takeaway. The second one for me is really that you don't always need to know the next step. You can just take a leap of faith and let it layer it, layer it,
mhm.
one by one so that you are just building based on what is coming naturally, what you're feeling passionately, and what is actually falling in place in your business that works sustainably for you. Can I ask, like, was there any part of your food blogging and photography journey where you took on something that either led to burnout, it was unsustainable, or something that you had to absolutely drop because you thought that it was either financially not viable or it just took away all your energy? Was there anything like that?
Well, like I said, I was very flattered to do a lot of these brand partnerships, and they were the most profitable, but they are the most stressful. This idea of being an influencer didn't really resonate with me. I didn't really know what that meant. And then I was always like, okay, well, if they're paying me so and such money to advertise their product, like one, I want to do this authentically as possible. And then two, I want it to perform well. And like that kind of anxiety of like, I would post something on Instagram and Instagram's like, oh, we don't feel like showing this today. And then numbers wouldn't do well. And then I'd be like, oh no, now I'm never going to get hired again. Like that kind of roller coaster. I was not comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do like is these my other clients that I do work with where I get to make the recipe, photograph it, and then I hand it off to them and then they can do whatever they want with it. So if they want to put it on their social media, that's great. But I don't have to feel that
Yeah,
burden of like, oh my
yeah.
gosh, are people going to like this? And if they don't like it, am I putting someone else's, are they going to want to work with me again? So now, like when I do freelance work, I still get to create the work and then hand it off to them. And that makes me feel
Yeah.
a little bit better. Yeah.
Yeah, because there are so many things we don't have any control on. And social media is completely different from what it was a few years ago. It's
Mhm.
absolutely changed. And, just I can understand how stressful that is. But tell me, do you always position yourself as a recipe creator and photographer? Or do you also position yourself as only a food photographer based, on the client or the project?
It kind of depends on the project. I think most of my clients so far are coming to me because they know I am skilled in my field of dessert. I can do cookies, I can do cakes, things that not every cook can just jump in and make. If someone wants a really decorative cookie, I got you. And I've kind of built this reputation where yes, I can do intricate desserts and I can develop the recipe. Oh, and you need me to photograph it. Okay, I can do that too. And so, like, that's really great. So I've kind of positioned myself in that way that if they need a one-stop shop,
Yeah.
then please come contact me. Then let's talk. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's such a plus when you can do both. I mean, when you're so good at cooking, baking, styling, and then you can shoot it, like a boss. So I love that. You can position yourself as anyone depending on the project. You just open so many avenues of client partnerships. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, if there was an opportunity for me to show up on set with a food stylist and all I have to do is take a picture, that's great. Like I would love to do
Mm.
that. I've never had that experience personally, and I know a lot of beginner photographers probably aren't starting there. So I actually remember listening to an old podcast and I apologize, I don't even remember where I heard this or how this came about, but someone had asked, it was another question. They're like, "Well, what would you recommend for a food stylist?" And they're like, well, become a good cook and then you become a good food stylist because yeah, like it would be great to have this wonderful team, but if we are just starting we might not have it. So I can't imagine trying to photograph a delicious looking cake without already knowing how to make that delicious looking cake. So I think
Hmm.
if you want to be good at photographing a particular type of thing, maybe get good at that thing. Like if you're like, I really want to be a like cocktail photographer. Well, maybe you need to learn the nuances about how to make that cocktail first. So then you know how to capture it and how to get the best parts of it to make it the most appealing.
Absolutely. And I think
That make
that
yeah.
knowing your food is so important. Like even as photographers, we need to understand how long a food is going to stay in shape and what we need to do, to be able to capture it in its most photogenic state, So it's not just the
Mhm.
job of a food stylist, but even as photographers, we need to absolutely, have that knowledge, so we can execute better. So I
Yeah.
love how we have segued into our last question, Tessa. I just love how you left us with this solid tip. Can you also share maybe two or three of your, tips just from a business perspective and from a family perspective? Like how can someone make their food blogging and photography business profitable while also, while they maybe juggle huge family commitments? So what would be maybe your top three tips for building a profitable business?
Yeah, of course. I would say consistency and practice is always going to pay off. So, like I said, if you can try to get really good at even one thing, I know for me, this is kind of how my journey went. Is like I was known as the cake girl. So fine. Like I would love to venture out beyond desserts. I cook all the time,
Hmm.
and I would love to do more savory things. I would love to get into like cocktail photography. That looks so much fun. But for me, I know I don't have that kind of time to do everything. So I'm really going to stick into my wheelhouse here. And it's really worked out well for me to be known for something specific. And then, to kind of get my foot in the door with some of these brands. And then they can kind of say, like, oh, you can do other things. Okay, well, maybe we can explore more
Mm.
there. But just like really getting good into, if you really want to break in somewhere, get really good at one thing and get no and just like always just keep practicing. So like I would say diversify yourself and don't forget to bet on yourself sometimes. So like I mean I might diversify maybe too much because I'm always like dabbling in a million different things, but it's really helped. But like also like don't forget about yourself. And like that's one thing I mentioned earlier where I for kind of let my own website put that on the back burner for a while. And now I think like, oh my gosh, what if I had been like really keyed into that this whole time? But like I can move forward from that and make sure that I set some time aside for my own work. So then you don't get caught up in doing the same things and the same work for clients and then look back a couple years later and not have improved or anything. So make sure that you are diversifying yourself and even, including yourself in your own portfolio in the mix there. And then lastly, I think this kind of applies to almost all businesses, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. They always say, like, it's all about who you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's totally true. It totally
Mm-hmm.
helps. Who you know will definitely help, but that doesn't mean it should be luck of the draw. Like, it shouldn't be like, oh, well, I know like my college roommate's brother works at this company or my neighbor happens to work at this company. So, like, I know them. It means like, no, don't it shouldn't be dependent on luck. It means if it's all about who you need to get to know more people. So then that means going back and kind of introducing yourself to people and like letting them get to know you. So then if there is a project, you're more top of mind. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not just totally random. So yeah, it is who you know, but get yourself to be known. And then that should help.
Right. I love
If that
it.
makes sense.
Yeah. So basically set a niche for yourself so that you're known for at least one thing that is, really setting you apart. Second is diversify your business. And the third one is leverage the power of meaningful connections and maybe just expand your network so you are
Yeah.
growing a business.
Yeah, I feel like as a photographer, and I'm sure a lot of other photographers that put ourselves in this position is we like to be behind the camera.
Mm.
And we like to be online, but like let's not forget old-fashioned networking. And I say this and I'm saying it to myself because I don't enjoy that aspect of it either, but it's important. And once you do it, it feels a lot better when you start making those connections with other people. You're like, "Oh, this is great. This actually does feel good." And then hopefully you can kind of circle back around and hopefully our careers are long enough where will continue to meet people and then someone you may have introduced yourself to, a couple years ago will come back around and find you.
All right. So I absolutely love it. I love it because, these sound very simple, but it is these simple little things that make all the difference. So I just absolutely love how you shared them because they are a great reminder and they are, all about do the little bits and they're going to make the biggest difference in your business. So thank you so much, Tessa, for being here today and for sharing so much. I'm really in awe of everything you do while you handle three children, a home, and this thriving, beautiful, passionate business of yours. Before you go, Tessa, can you tell us a little bit about where our audience can find your beautiful blog, where they can subscribe to your newsletter and read all your personal stories, and where they can come check out your drool-worthy cake photos on Instagram?
Yes, of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. Hopefully, someone, if you're listening, you can take at least one little piece of advice or, part of my journey and apply it to yours. And, hopefully, my passion for what I do is coming through and can, hopefully ignite your own passions because that's really how I've made it this far. Like, there's so much work to be done and I feel like my to-do list is never complete, but like I truly enjoy this work. And so I think that's if you can find something that you really, really love, I think that's how it happens. Because it's like if I didn't truly love this, it would be so hard to keep it going. But you can find my work if you want to see it. You can subscribe to my newsletter. It's called Bake Club, and that is over on Substack. You can look at any of my recipes on my website. It's called stylesweet.com. And my two books are Layered and Icing on the Cake. You can also find me on Instagram is Style Sweet Daily.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tessa. I'm sure our food bloggers and our photographers and our moms and everyone who's tuning in is really inspired and applauding you for everything you've done. So go, go, go. Thank you so much for sharing all this like wonderful information with us. Thank you for being here today. So this was part 2 of our conversation with Tessa. And tell me that you could relate to her at every single level. I mean, right from uprooting her business and starting something new to following her passion to being able to be present for her family to driving her career in spite of not always knowing the next step and to really, pushing it forward and making decisions that worked for her without having the pressure of trying to be like anyone else. Come on now. Did this leave you inspired or did this leave you inspired? I hope that it gave you a lot of encouragement that building a business is not so difficult because the advantage of building a business is that we can build it as and how we want it around the commitments that we have on our personal level. What I absolutely truly love is there was never a point where Tessa did not push the limits, where she was complacent, where she did not do a little bit more than what it was to be in her comfort zone. As a baker, she started blogging. As a blogger, she started photographing. As a photographer, she started working with brands. As that, she started doing her own cookbook. And as writing her own cookbook, she also shot it. So come on now. There was like one step after the other. And she's just been, taking these leaps of faith and having that sense of it's going to work out. I just need to keep going. I hope that this was inspiring, educating, and it was informative about what it takes to also be a dessert food stylist, a dessert food blogger, and to have your own niche to be able to make a unique identity for yourself. So many takeaways and so many learnings from this episode. And if you have any questions about it, please feel free to email me at hello@myfoodlens.com or reach me on Instagram at Gutama_myfoodlens. I'll see you next week with another episode. Until then, bye bye.